All right, so excited to welcome everybody to our annual Wurf Memorial Lecture. It is always a highlight of the Harvard Trade Union program, and tonight will no doubt continue that tradition. But before we get sort of our program started, I just have to take a moment to acknowledge that those of us at CLJE who have had the honor of working with our partners at AFSCME over the years on the Wurf Lecture and on so many other important projects, this year feels a little different. We learned last night that our sister in these endeavors, Elissa McBride, is going to retire from AFSCME at the convention this summer, along with AFSCME President Lee Saunders. And to say that this is the end of an era is an understatement. Elissa's been with AFSCME for 25 years. I know, she was a small child. And has been a force of nature that whole time. She's devoted much of her time at AFSCME to building the next generation of great labor leaders. And we have been the very lucky beneficiaries of that focus. So it has truly been an honor to learn from you and to work with you here at the center on all of these great projects like the Wurf Memorial Lecture. So as Elissa comes up to bring the legendary Jerry Wurf into the room with us, I just want to say a huge congratulations.
Okay. For those of you how many folks here worked with Elaine Bernard? She used to say, "I'm not retiring, I'm being redeployed." And that is my plan. I'm going to be one of the redeployed somewhere in the labor movement. And, thank you for the partnership here. I just want to do exactly what Sharon said and bring Jerry Wurf into the room. This is the lecture that is in his name and in his memory. But first, let's see who here is from the trade union program. Okay, so our speaker can see who you're talking to. And who's an AFSCME person who's coming to join from elsewhere? All right. And other guests, visitors, labor movement folks locally who are here tonight? Okay, great. And anyone else, any other categories I missed? Law students? Okay, so it's great to be in a room like this. I know it's a room of activists and movers and shakers, and that's what we need right now. And Jerry Wurf was one. He was the president of AFSCME for many years. He was an organizer to start. He was a ferocious fighter of bosses and injustice. And his wife, Mildred, who served with Sharon and I as an advisor to the Wurf Fund for many years, was equally ferocious in her work as a labor educator and then to support Jerry Wurf as president of AFSCME and raise their kids. And I would say that this might be the lecture they would have been most excited about, because the person who we're going to hear from is going to be pushing out the boundaries of public sector collective bargaining rights in a state that has banned those rights for public employees for decades. So they would be very excited to know that this lecture was happening tonight. And I'll just say a word about the other work of the fund, because some of it really touches on what you all are doing here. Other lecturers past, which I think are wonderful predecessors to our lecturer tonight, Jamie Raskin, before he was a congressman and fighting the Trump administration, gave this lecture. Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center, who's still cranking out amazing work to support workers, and the former Secretary Treasurer of AFSCME, Bill Lucy, who's a legend in his own right, have all given this lecture. And the fund also provides scholarships for people to sit in these chairs, and most recently supported some groundbreaking research on the impact of state-based heat standards so that workers can be safe and can live when they have outdoor jobs in places where the heat can kill workers. And Sally Tyler, who's here from AFSCME, helped make that happen along with Jack Trumpor from the CLJE. And we would love to see more states adopt those kinds of heat standards, like Virginia, so that we can make sure that workers can survive and thrive in their jobs. And so let me just say before I turn it back over to Sharon that now more than ever, we need spaces like this to think together, to be together, to strengthen our solidarity, because there are some real fights ahead of us this year. So I'm grateful to be in the room with all of you. I'm grateful to be in solidarity with Sharon, and I'm grateful to be able to hear our speaker tonight. So Sharon, I will hand it back to you.
Okay, I am thrilled to introduce this year's Wurf lecturer, Jessica Looman. I am lucky to have had the opportunity to work with Jessica in the Biden administration, where she served as the administrator of the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. There, she brought her passion for standing up for working people to the division's mission to protect the wages and well-being of our nation's 165 million workers. She led strategic initiatives to ensure enforcement of minimum wage and overtime laws, prevent retaliation against workers, and modernize the administration of the federal Davis-Bacon Construction Prevailing Wage Program, something I know that is important to many people in this room. Prior to serving in DC, Jessica was the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Commerce and deputy commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. We're so excited, though, because she has just embarked on a new adventure. Virginia's new governor, Abigail Spanberger, had the very good judgment to appoint Jessica to be the Commonwealth's new Secretary of Labor. And when she brings the smarts, compassion, and creativity to her new job that I saw her demonstrate at Department of Labor, the people of Virginia will see what an economy that works for everyone really looks like. One more thing, I know Jessica would never forgive me if I didn't also make sure that you all knew that she is a 30-year member of the Labor's International Union of North America. And I'm also honored to call her a friend, Jessica.
Thank you so much. All right, they gave me a mic, so be afraid. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for your friendship and your partnership and your mentorship. And thank you for everything that you've done, everything that you will do with your redeployment. It's really, can you guys hear me? Hello? Yeah. Okay. It's really exciting to be here tonight. I wore my Harvard purple for y'all. Thank you. I love the theme. Really what I want to be here to do tonight is sort of talk to you, learn from you, and also just sort of give you some space, right? I am currently at 6:20 p.m. standing between you and a reception. I understand what that obligation is and what that responsibility is. And the other thing is, and I just want to say this from the front end, I'm not going to tell you anything tonight you don't already know. You are already doing this work. You are doing it in the organizing that you're doing every day. You're doing it in the way you're thinking about how to be strategic every day. So really what I'm here to do, and so what Sharon's like to say, you're doing a good job. You got this. But the other piece is maybe have you had the opportunity, the time to think about some of this stuff lately? And so the topic of this conference, because I know you all read ahead, did all the reading ahead of time. The topic of this is, it's called Partnering with State and Local Governments, Strategies to Advance Workplace Rights. But the key takeaways are partnerships, strategies, and advancement, right? That's it. So for those of you who need to check your email, you can get the notes later. But for those of you who made the time to come tonight, for those of you who had put aside the things that you otherwise would have normally been doing, and coming here and thinking about this work. I think it's really, really important that you do sort of lift your head up and think about how all of the work that you do fits into this larger goal of partnership and strategies and advancement. So are you a good partner? Right? That's the first thing you have to ask before you blame somebody else for not being a good partner is, are you a good partner? Are you strategic? Every time. There's no give in this. You have to be strategic every single time. And then also advancement. What does success look like? And what does better look like? And, Sharon said that I came from, most recently from the U.S. Department of Labor, where we protected 165 million workers out of 11 million workplaces across the country. Like, what? Right? Like, the scope of that is absurd. And at the same time, making sure that we have the information at our fingertips to be strategic, to be good partners, and to think about what success looks like. That's what we want to talk a little bit about. So I know we already did this a little bit, but I want to, this is the interactive part. Pay attention, y'all, seriously. All right, so who here considers themselves from a union? Union member from a union. That was the easy one. Anybody here work in government, from government? My AFSCME friends. Government, go ahead. Woo. Okay, stay with me. Anybody here consider themselves a worker advocate? Anybody here consider themselves an employer? Right? So, those questions, yeah, you have to think about it though for a second, right? But yeah. So, the reason that I ask you those questions, I raise my hand on all four, right? I'm lucky am I. Raise my hand on all four. But I think that the piece that is really important about that is that, and I just want to start with this because this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and you guys have been talking a lot about it too, which is we bring our unconscious bias to all of our work about the other. And we talk a lot about unconscious bias in a lot of other ways and a lot of things that we know that we need to continue to address as a nation. But we have unconscious bias as we think about ourselves as union leaders and worker advocates, right? And one of the challenges that we have is othering government, othering employers, othering partners who we could instead leverage. Sometimes we just assume we understand and know what they're already thinking. And I just want you to step back and question some of that, just like you would any of your other conscious or unconscious biases about where you think people are going to do, or what you think people are going to say, or what you think their priorities are. Doesn't mean that we don't learn from our past experiences, right? Don't get me wrong, I get it. But at the same time, we don't want to impose those biases on the relationships because that makes us a bad partner, right? And the point of this whole conversation is how are we a good partner so that we can expect good partnership from those who we're trying to engage. So I think one of the things that I want to give you, just an example, and if you were the person who said this to me, I don't think you're here, but if you were, sorry, I'm going to use you as an example. So I have a lot of experience in government, right? I now have worked in the federal government, I worked in the state government in Minnesota, I now work in the state government of Virginia. Anybody here from Virginia? Anybody here from Minnesota? Close. Not the same, but close. Anybody here from Minnesota? Okay, good, then I'm going to tell lots of stories about them. Don't check back with them to see if they're true. So I think one of the things, this happened right after COVID. I had just started the wage and hour division. Actually, I had been there for a minute, but we hadn't been able to travel. So one of the first times I got to travel with the wage and hour division was I went out to Seattle to the Union Labor Conference, the Union Labor Lawyer Conference, right? They used to have it for the name, but the Union Labor Lawyer Conference is all the lawyers get nods, all the lawyers get together, right? We had one of those back of the room, we can have back of the room conversations later, but we had one of those back of the room conversations. And somebody came up to me, a union person came up to me and said, I worked with the USDOL once, and it was really bad, and I just don't see the point. And I looked at them, and I said, what do you want me to say when somebody from government says, I worked with the union once, it was really bad, I don't see the point. What do you want me to tell them? Because that is the kind of energy that people are putting out when they don't make the effort, when they don't take the time, and they attribute one experience to every experience. Does that sound like something we understand and recognize? So we need to make sure that as we're thinking about who our partners are, how we're gonna do the strategic analysis around, and what we sometimes call the power analysis, that we start thinking about those dynamics and how we're going to think about how we are as impactful as possible. So government, union, advocates, employees, employers, right? All of those people are the stakeholders in my world. You know, sometimes we use wonky terms like that's what they mean, right? They just mean people who like are people that we interact with. Sometimes we use that more generic term called stakeholders, but that's what they mean. They just mean regular people that we interact with. And I think that when we think about that and we sort of take the labels off of who we are and who we're dealing with, that's when we can really be more strategic. So why bother? Well, because there's this pesky thing called advocacy. How many of you consider yourselves advocates? Raise your hand again. So I'm going to focus more narrowly on worker protection policy advocacy, but I think it probably translates into a lot of different advocacy work that you do, right? There are really 3 types of advocacy. I'm going to talk mostly about the 3rd type because that's what I do, but I want to make sure that we outline the 3 types. If you already talked about this, again, just wait to the reception, you'll be fine. The 3 types of advocacy, right? Does anybody know what they are? Okay, electoral, legislative, administrative. Sound familiar? I'll walk through them. Electoral, anybody work on a campaign? Anybody work trying to get people elected? Right, that's electoral advocacy. And sometimes you think about it as big politics. It is also that. But for folks in this room, when we're thinking about how are we going to advance worker protections at the state and local levels, it's advocacy. The people that are getting elected are the people who are going to help identify, address, develop, and implement the policies that you're actually trying to achieve. So I don't want you to lose track of 2 things in electoral politics and then move on. One is prioritizing worker voice. Yes, you have your legislative agenda that your internationals and your district councils and your local, you have your own agenda. But one of the things that I hope that you can layer on top of that as you think about the work is how you want to prioritize worker voice as part of your own electoral advocacy, which is really at the end of the day what's important, right? It's not just the ability, it is also the ability of forming and joining a union, but it can also be around how do you support workers in the workplace? What do you think workers should be able to do in the workplace? And I say this coming from a place where, as Sharon said, school children in Virginia have been taught for the last 30 years that it is illegal to have a union. You gotta start where you are, right? And then you gotta go from there. And we can't be frustrated by starting where we are. So electoral advocacy is really, really important. The other thing on electoral advocacy that I think sometimes gets lost, and Sharon is a perfect example of this, and I'm sure she's talked a lot about it. But this phrase that we are now recognizing, which is personnel is policy. So when you're thinking about the advocacy around electoral politics, and when you're thinking about not just the person whose name is on the ticket, and frankly, not even just the person whose name is going to be Secretary of Labor, although we want you to think about us. But when you think about really where you can have influence, when we get to the 3rd part of it, which is administrative advocacy, personnel is policy at the electoral level. So how many of you have thought about who should be appointed to regulatory boards in your communities? Great. How many people have thought about who should be elected to school boards in your communities? Those are candidates that are on the ticket. How many of you have been thinking about who should be the Secretary of Energy in your communities? Jimmy, yes, thanks. Wait,
I work in DC.
You're killing my vibe. No, I'm just kidding. That's fine. That's good. I'm glad you're clear. So I think one of the things, like, there's a whole list of things that you can think about in terms of when you have somebody elected, where you want to influence the personnel's policy piece of this work, okay? That makes you a good partner because you are thinking about, this is something that happens at the federal level all the time, you are helping to think about how you are going to help them have the right people in place to help accomplish their agenda, and their agenda can be very much aligned with your agenda. So that you're actually helping them. That's what we're saying. You're helping. You with me? Okay. So those are the two things that I just want you to keep in mind in the electoral. I can answer more questions on that, but I think that that's really important. And I'll just give you one more example, which is in the Biden administration, which was very good at this, I thought, because I'm biased, but I thought it was very good at this, because Sharon. But part of it is like, in previous administrations at the federal level, I know we're being recorded, so I won't say this first comment I sometimes make, but let's just put it this way, that there hadn't always been, across administrations, people who really thought about worker voice and worker power. That was a nice way to put that, wasn't it? But in the Biden administration, there were people who understood worker voice and worker power at the Department of Energy, at the at HUD, right? At the Department of Agriculture, even the Department of Commerce. There were people who understood whether they were, there's lots more work we could possibly do in this, but I just can't stress this enough that this really matters, particularly on the national level, but it even matters on the state level. Okay, any questions on electoral advocacy? Electrical? That's not what I said. Okay, second type, legislative advocacy, right? We all know that, right? That's the piece that is, we have policies, we have lobbyists, we do legislative lobbying all the time. I'm hanging out with the AFSCME. I am working closely in alignment with the AFSCME folks in Virginia right now, right? Because we have a lot of important work that we're doing. But there's a couple things I want you to think about in legislative advocacy, which is my current favorite term. And for some reason I might be hungry because I have a lot of food terms in this space, but like, what flavor is my legislature? You'll remember that. This is a tough crowd, seriously. Dude, come on. What flavor is my legislature? And the reason that I say that is, again, because I worked in the Minnesota legislature, which has its own flavor, you betcha. It has its own vibe, right? I work, Congress, right? I mean, come on, bonkers. Now I'm hanging out in Virginia, and there's a Virginia way. And candidly, I will tell you, I think I'm 3 weeks into this job, so sure. A lot of my biases are being questioned about where I would normally, based on my experience in Minnesota, based on a little bit of experience in Ohio, and based on my experience in DC, a lot of my ballot biases are being challenged because I just automatically assume, of course, this member is going to vote for it this way. And then they ask these questions in hearings, and I'm like, wait, you just made a really pro-worker comment. Okay. So, like, what flavor? What's the flavor of the legislature? Don't make assumptions. You have to feel it out. You have to taste test it, and really sort of thinking about what that looks like. And then the second thing in legislative advocacy, and I'm in the throes of it. Virginia does a 60-day legislature. They work over the holidays. Yeah, I know. Who has like a full-time legislature? Yeah. Who has a 6-month legislature? Minnesota, kind of, right? How long is yours? Do you know? Short? Where are you from?
Washington State.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just learned, we have 60 days. And the legislature starts before the governor is sworn in. We're working on the last person's budget. There are 2,800 bills introduced. As you can imagine, in Virginia right now, there is an enormous demand for pro-worker labor policy that has been vetoed for the last 4 years. So we had this really technical term that we used in the Legionnaire divisions, maybe going to sound a little familiar to you, banana pants. That's what the legislature feels like. It is a lot. But I think one of the things that we have to think about is like, what does success look like, given the framework that we have to work within? Not that we don't challenge the framework, not that we don't try to do electoral politics, not that once you're in the arena, right? What are you gonna work with? What does success look like? And there's a couple of things that I think we sometimes miss in advocacy, so I'm gonna share those with you, food for thought, see if I get there. One is, and this was something that one of the first lobbyists that I ever worked with in Minnesota, when I was just a young government sprout. And his saying was, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I hold that in my mind, right? Not as a, like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, but like, you just did all this work in electoral politics. You now are trying to move an agenda forward. What is the, like, don't get entrenched and dug in the what you thought was gonna happen. You gotta be able to pivot, and you gotta be able to think about what you think can happen. And you gotta make hard decisions, right? And we're gonna talk about priorities in a minute, but you gotta make really hard decisions. So is the juice worth the squeeze? And then my newest one, which is, again, my grandma had a lot of silly phrases that I still use, but you know this, is the glass half full, right? Sometimes a half full glass should just be thrown out, like just pour it out. And sometimes a half full glass is worth drinking. And that you have to sort of think, like you have to be able to ask yourself that question, where you are in terms of what does success look like, right? One of the things that I'm very focused on is from a legislative perspective, is something we implemented. At the end of the day, does this actually help people, right? Are we actually going to be able to help people? And we can't help people if it can't be implemented. And then also, what is, in the grand scheme of things, what are we trying to accomplish here at the end of the day? Because sometimes we get so caught up in our commas and our semicolons and our mays and our shalls and all those kind of things, and those of us who are lawyers and we're like, it's really important. But the trick for all of you as advocates is to think about, at the end of the day, what does success look like? And then I think that there's the other thing that doesn't get out online, this is back to my personal bias, and Sharon's heard me talk a lot about this, is what is your plan for implementation? Because getting the bill passed is not the win. I'm just gonna tell you that right now. Getting a bill passed, unless you have decided that a messaging bill is what you're going for, okay, I'm willing to argue with you about that, but getting a bill passed is not the win. Actually getting it implemented is the win. And you know what it takes to implement things? Money. Money to implement things. And this is a problem that we had in the wage and hour division, this is a problem that we have in everything. I work with a lot of state government labor folks, labor commissioners and secretaries. It's what I got to do for the last year while I was with the NYU Wagner Labor Initiative. The number one issue is we will never, ever have enough money, but if well-meaning advocates continue to put forward more worker protections that we don't have the resources to actually implement and realize, do they really need anything? I mean, I know that's harsh, but do they really need anything? And so that's the other piece that we have to think about is, and I, bless their hearts, we had some amazing federal lobbyists who fought these issues when I was in the wage and hour division and did really, really good work. And then recognized and realized, and frankly, even the administration, one of the first things to lead any big proposal, any big policy proposal, is money, right? So if you think about the money to enforce, to hire enforcers and to actually implement programs, if you think about that money as separate from the policy, that continues to be problematic. If you think about it as integrated with the policy, that is how you're actually going to have legislative advocacy success. I am full of cheer and vigor. Okay, let's move to administrative advocacy because that's the piece that I obviously really love the most. How many of you have relationships with your governor's office? Great. How many of you have relationships with your labor secretary's office? How many of you, okay, fewer. How How many of you have relationships with the person who actually oversees the work that you do in the state? Okay, who's yours?
Right.
Not a person, but what's their job?
We're elevator constructors, so if you.
Never mind. Take them from building trades, never mind. No, elevator constructors is a great example, right? Like, it is a very discrete, high union density in an area where it is heavily regulated and you want to be at the table when they're doing regulations related to your sector, right? That's great, that's fantastic. I'm teasing you. I admire you. Who else has got relationships with people who regulate their sector or industry? Somebody else. I'm not gonna make fun of you like I did him. Yeah,
Firefighters union in
Okay.
Iowa,
okay.
so the state fire marshal, yeah, right, it's, no, state fire marshal, our lieutenant governor, who oversees the division for our, training requirements, all that stuff.
Okay, great. So like
Run
making
all
sure,
those committees.
fantastic, fantastic. So this is administrative advocacy. I'm gonna just give you an example of one of my mentors, who else is from the building trades? Anybody? Just my friend, the elevator constructor.
He's not an elevator guy.
Who guy are you?
He's elevators.
Elevators.
You're both elevators, okay.
Yeah,
It's an up and down business. I used to regulate elevators, and that was one of my jobs. So this will mean a little bit to you, but one of my mentors was a management side labor relations guy, right? He ran an all union construction industry association that oversaw electrical and mechanical contractors, bargained on their behalf for union construction work in Minnesota, right? Again, take away your biases, right? Yeah, he was on the management side, but you know what he did? Is that he cared about workplace safety, he cared about getting his union contractors more market share, he cared about making sure that there was work for union electricians and union plumbers because those were the workforce that worked for his employers that he worked for. And what he did, I'm not recommending this to everybody, but I'm putting this on the radar. They actually kind of almost joked that he should get his own office at the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry because he was there almost every single day. He also was at the legislature when he needed to be at the legislature, but he took administrative advocacy so seriously that there wasn't an electrical decision that was made, there wasn't a plumbing decision that was made. Frankly, he got himself on the workers' compensation board, so there was none of that, there was not a decision that wasn't made. He became invaluable to multiple labor secretaries, labor commissioners, and he just became integrated into the roles that were government, and he was an advocate. So that is one of the things that I always keep in mind, is that like you could be like Gary, right? How can you be more like Gary? So I just wanted to share that with you as an example of something that I think is really, really important. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of the components of administrative advocacy, because I think this is how you become a good partner. One is you have to advocate about access. Two is you have to advocate about what education looks like, education about the worker protections that you have. Three, I cannot stress this enough, we have to get our minds wrapped around this idea of compliance, right? Which is the idea that we can help make sure that employers, who are the regulated community of labors and industries, make sure employers have the information that they need to be in compliance, right? That is a very high impact, low cost way of changing the behavior of employers to make sure that they have the resources that they need, but also that they know what success looks like. What is the opposite of knowing what success looks like? A violation. Who doesn't want a violation? Employers who legitimately want to do the right thing. So compliance assistance is a really, really critical point, and there are ways to engage in compliance assistance as advocates. Let me just give you one example. One of the few laws that we got, one of the few amendments that have been made to the Fair Labor Standards Act in the last, decade. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is the minimum wage and overtime law that protects virtually every worker in the United States. Pop quiz, what's the federal minimum wage?
It's at 25.
Excellent, you guys all get an A for the night. So right, the federal minimum wage under the Fair Labor Standards Act is still $7.25, $2.13 for tipped workers in America. But the Fair Labor Standards Act gets amended very rarely. And one of the amendments to the Fair Labor Standards Act that happened in the Biden administration was there was an expansion of protections for nursing employees. Congress added about 9 million more workers who should get access to break time and safe space to be able to, time and space to be able to pump breast milk at work, right? Seems pretty lame to me. But we didn't do regulations, which is where sort of normal administrative advocacy lies. Don't sleep on that. We can talk about regulations all you want, but you have the expert in the room. But we didn't do regulations on what it meant for more people to have access to agricultural workers and construction workers and teachers to have, teachers didn't used to have access to being able to pump breast milk at work before this amendment. We didn't do rules on that. No. We worked with an advocacy group who had a phone call, who had a phone line about what for working, particularly working mothers, but for nursing mothers, but also for pregnant employees. And we got the questions that they were getting on their phone line, and we did FAQs on our website that was the answer to the hard questions that they were getting. We did an entire outreach, education, compliance approach, because the thing about not being able to get the opportunity to pump breast milk at work is that you don't have any time. It's not like you can go back and give back the breast milk, right? You actually have to pump breast milk when you need to pump breast milk. And so it's not an enforcement model, it's a compliance model. Employers need to understand their obligations, and we had to work with employers to make sure they understood what their responsibilities were. We had to educate workers so that they knew what their rights were, but we had to do that in a compliance model. We couldn't go back and just do enforcement and make it real. So thinking about whether the policy that you're trying to advocate for has a compliance component, or whether in fact you need enforcement. So just like getting the bill passed is not a win, enforcement is not a win either. And you're talking to an enforcement person. So the way I think about enforcement is when you are for enforcement, you've already lost. The worker didn't get paid correctly on payday. We've already lost. That worker's already lost, the law's already been broken, we are already behind. Enforcement is a symptom of the problem that you're trying to address with the policy. It is not the solution to the problem that you're trying to address with the policy. I used to, back in the olden days, when I was young in the labor enforcement space, I used to go out, talk to unions and talk to stakeholders and say, bring us your cases, we're here to help the government, we're here to help. Bring us your cases, we want to hear from you, we want to make sure that you and your members and they're coming to us and we're here. And then about 4 years ago, I was like, don't bring us your cases. Don't take an enforcement case to an enforcement agency unless. If you learn nothing else from me tonight, this is something I feel very passionate about. I'm happy to talk to you about it, but don't bring an enforcement case to an enforcement agency unless it is part of your larger strategic goals. If you don't have a way of, if you're not organizing, wrapping around, providing services, building trust, making sure that you have are actually trying to accomplish the goals yourself of worker voice and worker justice and economic security, the government can't help you with that. Because what is the government going to do? The government's going to put it in a pile and say, we're going to try earnestly, don't get me wrong. Wage and hour enforcers at the federal level and at the state level, they care so much. But I'll just give you a little perspective. At the wage and hour division in the US Department of Labor, remember 165 million workers, 11 million workplaces, they're down to less than 600 investigators. That's about one investigator for every 300,000 workers in this country. We invest in this country $1.50 a year per worker in wage enforcement. Okay? Wage enforcement is not a solution. Wage enforcement is a tool. It is a strategic tool that you can use, but it is not the answer. In Virginia, right now, there's about 4.3 million workers in Virginia. We have 4 people. I know. Did you hear? Do it again. We have 4 people, right? We're not able to do strategic enforcement in Virginia right now. We're not able to think really about like how are we having impact, how are we making a difference, how are we changing the behavior not just for the individual worker who didn't get paid correctly on payday, but how are we actually going to be able to change the behavior of a sector or an industry or a community or an economy. We're not able to do that right now. See what I see saying? Yet? We're not able to do that yet. So what I'm saying to you is, yes, we have to invest in enforcement strategies. We have to make sure we have strong enforcement language. We have to make sure we have strong retaliation language, because if workers don't think that they can be protected, if they actually go to their government to get help, then they're not going to come to their government to get help. We have to make sure that we have enough investigators. We have to do all of those things. But we also have to be really, we in the advocacy space have to be really strategic about how we use those tools. Because we need to be able to put it as part of a larger strategic enforcement plan. Go ahead.
Part of it is we don't put teeth into the stuff. I'm telling you, you can change behavior. If you didn't just go after like lost wages and things like that, but if there were severe penalties put in place for employers when they did not do what they're supposed to be doing. I deal with regulation all over Canada and the United States in the elevator trade. And I deal with places where we have regulation with penalties for business owners and everything else, and things tend to work better there. And we have stuff where there's regulation with 0 teeth in it, and they're kind of like, whatever. And so whenever we develop strategies, you have to have teeth in the regulation.
So you have to have teeth, I agree, but it has to be funded. And it has to still, my point is, I don't disagree, because if we don't have a team, we can't do anything with it. But it still has to be used strategically, right? It has to be part of, it can't just be, I know this, because again, I've been here for a long time. It can't just be, because I've got these calls, I know this guy's cheating. I know he's not paying prevailing wage, or I know he's not, he's misclassifying workers as in the wrong labor classification or as independent contractors. I know it. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing about it? Like, that's gonna be my answer back. And I don't mean to be harsh about this, but I've been doing this a long time, and that's going to be my answer back. What are you guys doing about it, and how do we fit in? Because I can't fix it. We will never, ever be able to enforce our way into an economy that works for everyone. We are only going to be able to organize our way into an economy that works for everyone. So I agree. We have to have teeth, but we also have to have strategy. Anybody have other thoughts on it? You can disagree. Yeah,
Is that kind of a cop-out though?
say more.
Like, I mean, it gets to a point where maybe you are the person, right? Like, if he's tried, he's telling you. So,
Totally.
so what are you doing? I did my best, now I'm coming to you.
Yep, totally. And that's what that back to being a good partner, right? How are you communicating with your partner? How are you being strategic? How are you thinking about the outreach and education that you're doing as part of enforcement? And how are we thinking as our enforcement as part of the outreach and education and trust building that you're doing? That's what a good, strong partnership looks like. And that's why we call it strategic partnership, right? I will say that governments have often been doing sort of like, we call it, outreach. And outreach is just making people feel good about it. And it's great, don't get me wrong. It's bringing awareness, people need to know what the laws are, they need to know what the rights and responsibilities are, I get that. But that's not strategic. What's strategic about that is how does that help us inform strategic enforcement efforts, right? So which targets we should go to so that we can actually find violations. How are we going to actually put that together so that we not just help those workers, but help and change the sector of the industry? I agree. It's not a cop-out by the church and imagination. That's our job. I get it.
Right.
But it's not, we're trying to talk about outcomes. We're trying to talk about how we actually make it bigger than ourselves, and that has to be done in both ways. Sorry, go ahead.
I agree with what Dave said, but also like, just in Massachusetts alone, we have over $1 billion in stolen wages every single year, which is also $200 million in taxes that we're losing every single year. We've been a bill to fix this for 10 plus years. No one's done anything on it. But in the meantime, like if you were stealing $1 billion a year from banks, they would have people with machine guns standing on every corner. But the fact that it's from workers is what doesn't matter. So it's not about, I mean, it is about what you're saying, but it's also not about, it's about the government not spending the resources that should be spent doing the things that it should be doing. Because if this was a corporation, if these were banks that were losing this money, that would be a huge issue. But because it's workers losing this money in smaller amounts per person, the government doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
So, again, back to the beginning of my conversation, which is, this is about creating partnerships that are strategic, that advance worker protections, right? And the government has to be a partner. And what I just heard you say was that the government was to blame. And what I'm also, totally legit.
We've given them a solution for 12 years to increase enforcement, and which will also give them more money to pay for enforcement. We're talking about $200 million in taxes. Do you know how much $200 million could fund in enforcement?
So
But
much.
like the state of Massachusetts, which is, you know, a supermajority of Democratic legislators, we can't even get it to the floor in the House. The Senate passed it unanimously. But it's like there's these roadblocks, even in the Democratic Party, that are stopping this from getting done, which is atrocious.
I'm 100% there with you, right? Like, and that's why I'm talking about 3 different kinds of advocacy, because we have to do all 3, right? The electoral advocacy, right? The legislative advocacy, and the administrative advocacy. So I totally agree with you, and I don't disagree. That C note about $1.50 investment in wage enforcement in the United States, right? And I would go to staff, this will make you, like, I would go to my wage and hour staff, particularly, and they would be like, if you really cared about this, we get more money, right? If you really, like, I'm standing up there in front of them, just like I'm standing in front of you, they work for the government, and they ask me the exact same thing, which is, if you really cared about this, you get us more money. I get it, and you're totally right, and that's why we have to make sure that the money is part of the legislative advocacy, but we also have to, and I am 1,000,000% with you on accountability, transparency, but also, and making sure that you are leveraging the tools that you have to continue to influence that process, because the system is not set up to do exactly what you want it to do, and we have to figure out how to fix that. So I'm only kind of playing devil's advocate here. You're not going to get me to disagree with you on all of the things you just said. Yeah.
If you're looking
Well, you're a bricklayer, you could have said that.
So if you're looking for partnerships, we're your partner. Just give us a badge.
So this is a question, this is something we've heard a lot, right, which is about this sort of deputization of union folks. I have a lot of different feelings about that. I've kind of evolved in terms of my
Not a
thinking.
badge, not a gun, but give us something. I mean, when we go to the government, we wrap everything. We've done as much as what we can do, and then we wrap it up, put it in a nice ribbon, and we send it off to you. We give you everything,
Totally.
and then it just sits there.
Yeah.
It's trying to.
Yes, right? And that's why we have to, I'm not disagreeing with you.
No.
One of the greatest strategic partners that I've ever gotten to work with are for contracting foundations, particularly in the prevailing wage space, like because they have committed resources, they're smart, they can really, they understand the sector and the industry, and they do really, really good work. So that is a strategic partnership board of investment by the unions and the signatory employers, and then also when governments get smart and figure out how to leverage those so that you can actually have enforcement outcomes, I agree that it works really, really well. Is everybody doing it? No, right? And again, so one of the other things that we've been doing a lot of is thinking about how do we take the best practices of where it works. The country, the world is getting smaller and smaller all the time. We still have to do local advocacy, we still have to do state advocacy, we still have to do federal advocacy. That's just the system that we live in. but the best practices are being able to be shared across more and more governments. We have more folks who are thinking about, more state agencies who are thinking about strategic enforcement than ever. We have more attorneys general's offices who are doing worker advocacy and consumer protection sections, which those two things go hand in hand. So there's more. We got a long way to go. But that's a great example, actually, of when strategic partnerships work, is when those things are a two-way street in terms of communication as well as sharing of information. Because the goal in strategic enforcement, as you guys know, and the way I think about this, and David Weil, who is a friend and teacher and a person to whom I very much look up to, let's be honest, he kind of invented strategic enforcement. I feel cool about that. But one of the things that we think about how we continue to evolve it is when you think about what employers or sectors you need to investigate, you think about it from the perspective of, it used to be we sort of throw spaghetti on the wall and see what stuck, right? That was sort of the first level. And then we started with Dr. Weil's, really smart thinking and analysis. We started putting dartboards on the walls. And we started throwing darts at those. And as we continue to refine strategic enforcement, the goal is to get a bullseye more and more often, every single time. So we're using our limited investigative resources to go to the places where we are most likely to find violations, but also where we are most likely to impact. Right? So that's what I'm talking about in terms of strategic enforcement and why I'm like, don't bring us everything. Bring us those cases. If you can. If you got a permanent that you can live with.
And we know that there has to be a victim, right? And I think that government, when there's a victim, I think that the government jumps a little bit faster. When you have somebody, when there's somebody there that can say, I was aggrieved and so something needs to get done. But it's the union just calling and saying, hey, you need to do something about the sky. Sometimes it's like, the sky's fault. And we know that. We know that, by us making those false calls or making those calls that are not going to get anywhere, that's generating money that's being lost that can go somewhere else.
You just gave the talk. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Where are those cases, where are those times that make the most sense? And I agree that there needs to be a violation, right? Which means that there needs to be a worker who didn't get the thing that they were protected under the worker protections. But I think that the things that we're seeing, and I just want to make sure that I close the loop on this. The thing that we're seeing in administrative advocacy, and the reason that I bring this up, is that I want you to sort of take it out of the mindset of just enforcement and think about all of this as advocacy, right? What is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and where are the levers where you can achieve it? And so I agree, we need teeth, we need money, we need partners, we need all. But what are we trying to achieve here? And if we're trying to get these three guys the money that they should have earned, I get it. If that's the goal, if that's the strategy, that's probably, that can be the approach you take. But if you're trying to get those three guys because you're trying to get this contractor, because you're trying to organize this sector, right? That is part of a larger strategy, and the enforcement component, whether frankly it's in wage and hour or other enforcement agencies like EEOC or OSHA or other places like that, that is all part of your larger strategic enforcement strategy that you guys can own, and that we can be a partner in. All right, you guys are getting tired. So I'm going to skip over what's keeping me up at night because you guys have enough keeping me up. I'm going to, and I'm happy to answer any questions and talk about some of these things, but I kind of want to talk about what I'm hopeful about. I mean, okay, let me just lay this out. What's keeping me up at night? Pretty much all federal labor law policy right now, full stop. As well as, in my home state, what is happening to the most vulnerable workers and their families in our communities, as well as just this sort of complete disregard for, something that I hold very dear, which is the rule of law and democracy. But, okay, that's what's keeping me up at night. Anybody else? But here's what I'm really hopeful about. I am really hopeful about the fact that there is more, well, first of all, than draw here, right? and that there are more people thinking about what it's going to take in order to actually change things at the local and state level, and really continue to grow and build worker power and worker voice at the local and state level. And what I'm even more excited about is that it's happening in places that are not the traditional places where we had had normally seen, right? We need to hold and continue to grow those lines. But what I'm really excited about, I'm not gonna lie, is Virginia. I'm really excited about what's happening, some of the things that are happening in New Mexico and some of the places that are, sort of in the Southwest in terms of how they're thinking about protecting workers and how they're thinking about growing, recognizing that they're growing a labor force. The way that we're thinking about this in Virginia, and I'll just, is that we are recognizing and understanding that Virginia needs to be both a great place to do business and a great place to work. And that those two things cannot actually be mutually exclusive. And that is a pretty big culture change for Virginia, but it's a pretty big culture change in a lot of places. And so I'm really excited about that. That is one of the things that's making me really excited. I'm happy to sort of talk more about that. I think some of the other things that I'm really excited about are this sense of urgency that folks are really feeling around this work. Not just, again, I've been doing this for a long time, and we go through these ebbs and flows around, it sucks. It all sucks. Why do we bother? We're fighting over the hardest things, and we're fighting for the most vulnerable workers, and it just sucks. And then you come back out and you're like, but look what we've accomplished. Look who we got elected. Look at the laws we got passed. Look at the units we got organized. Look at the people who understand and care about and recognize the importance of unions. Look at that. And I feel like we're in this sense of urgency around continuing to leverage that, the top of the mountain. I don't know if you feel that way. You guys are tired. And you got like 3 more days before you graduate. But that's what I'm saying, 2 more days before you graduate. You're like, don't give me more. So I think that's the other thing that I'm really hopeful about. And then I think that the last thing that I really want to sort of talk about is that, ironically, since I've been talking for a while, but I am seeing, and I hope you all are seeing, this sort of transformation between this idea of from concept to action. And what I mean by that is that we are not just talking about this concept of strategic partnerships and strategic compliance and strategic enforcement, but we're really moving into this place of strategic, what I like to call strategic doing, which is not just about thinking about it or talking about it or writing about it, although all of that needs to happen, but really thinking about what the components of strategic doing are. And I have some ideas, and it's going to surprise you. I have some ideas. No policy without a plan, right? Which means that don't pass a law if you don't have a plan for how it's going to be implemented and who it's going to help. No plan without input. So don't make that plan in a vacuum. Make that plan with making sure that you're talking to the people that are actually going to be impacted. I can't tell you how many times I've already asked in many of my jobs, and I'll just own my new job, which is like, did we ask any workers about that? Like, don't make a plan without the input of the people who are actually trying to help. But I'm excited about that. No input without outcomes, right? Don't just put the resources in if you don't actually have a plan and don't measure how you're actually changing the way that it was when it started. At the Department of Labor, so those are the 3 things. No policy without a plan, no plan without input, and no input without outcomes. And I guess I will add one more, which is, don't think about it without making the commitment to do it, right? One of the things that I think is the hardest thing that I've had to sort of come to grips with, I'll just use that term, is that you guys will go into a room and you will say, they should. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. This is the way it should be. And shoulding never gets us anywhere, right? That's how I would put that. But more importantly, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? What are we gonna demand? What are we gonna ask for? What's the doing in the thinking behind what the challenges are? And that's, to me, what strategic doing is, right? And I think that in USDOL, we're really thinking about strategic enforcement, how we develop partnerships with unions, stakeholders, worker centers. The goal there was, the strategic doing there was building trust. Was building trust so that when we had an enforcement action, we could actually have impact. So that's sometimes going to be the strategic doing. But I think the other part that is happening right now that I'm really excited about in this sort of strategic doing piece is like just a recognition and investment in this understanding that we are all part of this larger network of folks who care about folks, and folks who want to make a difference, and folks who want to have impact on worker power and worker voice across the country. And how do we leverage that as opposed to just thinking about it. So happy to answer more questions on that. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up, I promise. It's good. That was my signal. Wrap it up. Okay, so just the takeaways, right? You can take what you want, leave the rest. That's the beauty of all of this work. You guys, as I started out, you guys do this work, you think about this work. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You're doing a great job. There we go. But also at the same time, I think that as you think about how you're going to be a good partner, how you're going to be strategic, how you're going to advance worker protections, I think that the way that we have to really think about that is that we don't want to, and we're working a lot on affordability in Virginia, that economic insecurity and affordability are not only for the government to solve. They aren't issues that can just be fixed by unions or by workers. They're certainly not problems that can be fixed by blaming workers, which we're seeing so much of that happening today. And they frankly cannot even be fixed by demonizing employers, right? We aren't going to fix any of the things that way. Those, frankly, are excuses that we are making because we're not getting the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I think that you guys took this time tonight, you listened to me, you disagreed with me, or you agreed with me, you thought about some things, or maybe you didn't, which I do know, that's fine too. But I think that as you're working your head around all of this work, as you're taking in what you're learning at the program, and what you really want to do with it, because that's why you're here, I just really hope that you think about that all of the work that you do fits into this larger program, this larger setting, this larger system change that we're trying to do around actually making it about workers and worker voice and worker economic security. And so I think that if you think about who you are and what you bring to the table, and you look across the table and you think about what they bring to the table and how you can get to the outcomes together, that's really how you're going to continue to advance worker protections at the local and state level. So, with that, I always say this because I think, particularly in these times, this work, the work that you are doing, is both a privilege, but it is an awesome responsibility. You hold workers' hands, you hold their livelihoods, you hold their families, your community in your hands. And that's a lot. That's a lot to put on your shoulders. That's a lot. You came here, came away from your family to do this. So the number one thing that I hope that you take away from this whole experience, but that you also give yourself grace and patience, and you give each other grace and patience, and you take care of yourself and you take care of each other. So with that, thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any more questions, but I do think Sharon's going to need you.